So to introduce Ian here, Ian is a leadership coach who coaches lots of different teams at high-tech companies and startups, helping them articulate their strategy, defining kind of their metrics, and helping them set powerful goals. His recent clients have included fintech and insurtech unicorns, a world-leading VC, and he's also worked with a number of different SaaS organizations. Really excited to have him joining us.
Thank you very much. Hello from London. If you're west of me, good morning, good evening, afternoon to those east of me. Thanks for joining. Thanks again, Scott, for organising high quality learning opportunity. I'm going to talk to you about how OKRs can help liberate your strategy and bring it to life. It relates closely to Rosemary's fantastic talk that I just listened to. Hopefully the insights will dovetail for you. And thanks very much, Rosemary. That was great. You're going to need your phone to this talk, as we will have some interactivity to keep us engaged. I see some people are even answering the questions and they don't even know what they are yet. So kudos to them for that. So there'll be a QR code for you to use later. I just want to make sure you've actually got a pulse out there. So let me start with a quote from Empowered by Marty Kagan, just because this is a book that connected so many dots for me, and this comment in particular resonated. This is something he said about strategy organizations outside of Silicon Valley. And I often meet C-suites and teams that are adamant they have a mature strategy, a strategy that is adaptive, emergent, and coherent. And on review, when I start talking to them, it's rarely the case. Yeah, sometimes there are documents, sometimes there are strongly held opinions. Rarely is there high quality strategy. And I wonder how many of you listening here today would say, yeah, we have a mature strategy. And I wonder for how many it is actually true. And before I was a strategy coach, I worked in many large organizations with what I would call performative strategy that solves no real problem aside to tick the box, mark strategy. So have you ever found yourself in one of these problems? You have trouble prioritizing your work at any level. Is there a missing ingredient to help you choose one path of action over another? You reach the end of a period and don't know how to decide what to do next. You may have completed a goal or a release, but you don't know what the next step is. Members of your team aren't aligned on what you're trying to achieve. If you have a conversation with different people on a team, you get a different perspective. Some have no clear answer at all as to what success is. And one of my favorites, you celebrate releasing software, but deep down, you know it had a limited impact. You're a lean delivery machine, building software and successfully releasing it. Great. But how often do you circle back to see if the impact was as you expected? Well, you don't have enough alignment on what success even is. Okay, revenue, sure, selling more is good, but you can't connect to an outcome as a group that's more leading than that. So I'm interested to hear how many of you experience these challenges, and I see some of you already had a go at the Slido, but yeah, go ahead and let me know. You should be able to scan that QR code there. Good stuff. We've got quite a few answers in, 31, keep them coming. I haven't yet had anyone who said they've faced none of these problems. That's good. That's quite reassuring. And about 40% showing that they've actually experienced some of them. I'll show the Slido at the end, the two sets of results, simply because switching back to the view in Zoom will probably cause us a couple of problems. So thank you very much for contributing. I can confirm there are at least 94 of you are awake and listening. Great. So if you've experienced any of these problems, I'm here to propose an approach that can help resolve some of them. I'm one of those people who took a long time to find their place. I've worked in every role in tech, from product management to engineering leadership, portfolio directing, most pertinently in strategy. And I've worked in many industries, including education, scientific publishing, tech consulting, pharmaceuticals. And most recently, I've been working with high growth tech startups, unicorns, helping them solve focus and alignment issues by helping with strategy and with OKRs. So the one strand that persisted throughout my career is a need to know why. I'm one of those annoying people who can't just be told, do it. There have been two questions that embody that. And the first one, why are we doing this? When I was put on a project or asked to build a product or anything, I always want to know why. And follow that with, okay, and how will we know if we succeeded? And I wouldn't recommend it as great career advice. As I've found to my detriment, it can really annoy some leaders who just want to tell you to do it. But these are questions we should answer. We should always be able to answer. And they dovetail, these two questions dovetail well with the way I use OKRs. And that's why I like the framework. It can help us get to the heart of things. Okay, let's get started with a couple of definitions. So what is OKR? It's a goal-setting framework. One thing it isn't a silver bullet. It helps you solve a narrow range of problems quite well if you have the right context. Try not to oversell it here. If you want to know more about OKR, so this is the only book I recommend. It's from my friend Christina Wadkey. It's absolutely fantastic. So breaking them down a bit, and I appreciate I'm in the way a bit there. Objective is a qualitative description of what we're trying to achieve. I always couple this with the answer to two extra questions. Why this, why now? And why this objective and why not something else at this point? And I think Rosemary also touched on this. And the key result is the way you measure progress towards that goal. And good key results, to me, they have the following characteristics. They are outcomes. This is a measurable beneficial effect for your stakeholders. And the best stakeholder is the customer. But your company, your employees, or even the wider world can be relevant stakeholders too. Usually a good key result represents a change in behavior, but that's not always the case. It's okay to save costs, for example. It's a pretty lightweight framework, and there is no canon as there is with something like Scrum. Part of the power is flexibility, and that's also part of its difficulty as well. So how to define strategy? It's even more difficult, but I like to describe it as an evolving view of how you will succeed. This is quite broad, but I think it cuts to the chase. But let's have a couple of other definitions to bolster that. One I love is from Roger Martin, shown here. Strategy is not a long planning document. It's a set of interrelated and powerful choices that positions the organizations to win. Or as Richard Rummelt would say, a good strategy is a coherent mix of policy and action designed to surmount a high-stakes challenge. Going a little bit deeper than that, what are the components of a good strategy? And Richard Rummelt's definitions from good strategy, bad strategy are great. He talks about three elements: a diagnosis of the problem. And as product managers, I know you will talk about falling in love with a problem. It's just as critical where strategy is concerned. And number two, an overall guiding policy explaining how. So how are you going to resolve that? And a kind of set of coherent actions designed to focus your efforts. Okay, so we're on with some definitions. Let me take you through a worked example. This is based on experiences I've had, but to keep things anonymous, it's actually a synthesis of various situations I've found myself in. So we're going to look at an EdTech organization and a journey they take. We'll call them the Learning Center. Now the team there was struggling with the problems I shared at the top of the talk. They had good flow, regularly released software, but prioritizing was always hard for them. They'd tried RICE and other frameworks, but to no avail. When they finished each quarter, they didn't really know where to head next. They also wondered how the stuff they built contributed to a bigger picture. Recognizing these problems, the team built their first strategy. They talked about their vision, where they were heading to. They segmented their market. They began to understand the crux of their challenge, the heart of their strategy. And the Learning Center helps students pass public exams so students can find lessons, pay to add them to their library and use them. They can also purchase a monthly or annual subscription for all lessons. So success for the Learning Center is predominantly measured in sales and subscriptions. Ultimate success. The organization needs a continuous flow of new students as current students move out of the education system. And the leadership team concluded that pass rates was the crux of their strategic challenge. They believed that they could improve that with better lessons. So what they did, they focused on the 16 to 18-year-old market. And given the challenges of different curricula, they decided initially to focus on a few key states within the US. They had a vision to revolutionize online study, radically improving remote study pass rates and democratize learning. And they believed that they would do that by improving their lessons and supporting a range of learning styles. So you can see how they're starting to make, Rosemary touched on this as well, strategic choices. And as Michael Porter would tell you, strategy is all about deciding what not to do. They talked about their big ideas, how to achieve their vision, and they believe more instructors creating more videos would help. They were pretty pleased with their efforts, and there were backslaps and high fives all around. So the team were invigorated by the new strategy. They were excited to get going. They had new decisions and insights, and the strategy was shared with the organization. And all they had to do now was execute. And this is really the heart of the talk. This is where we get into the area of what I'd call a spiky opinion, but more of that later. Let's see what happened with the new strategy in place. Well, first quarter, full of energy. Strategy was done and dusted. This was their time to shine. Plenty of new features were produced in that next quarter. But this is where the good news stops. So this is an inconvenient truth, which I'd hope that everyone on this call knows. Strategy had some opinions around the cruxes of the challenge, but it wasn't mindful of this old adage. Most ideas you have don't work. And those are quoted figures from those three organizations. And the strategy didn't adapt to those failures, nor did the team have a mechanism for connecting what they called execution back to strategy. They were essentially two separate disciplines, related but not influencing each other. The strategy was soon out of date. Teams stopped referring to it, and some of the hypotheses embodied in the document were already disproven. From there, old habits returned. The work the teams created deviated from any real purpose. They got back to being busy, but the path outlined in their strategy was no longer valid. So in some sense, they were back to progressing blind. The teams once again looked productive, but adopted the success theatre of shipping features, and the strategy effort had really burnt out. But this is a resilient group. So the disappointment of a failed strategy process didn't hurt them. They'd heard the OKRs are the big thing and embarked on getting a coach in. Now the coach knew the framework well, emphasized a few key principles. The team looked at the next period and thought, what's a wildly successful quarter look like? How do we move the needle towards our vision? And the coach gave them sound advice on the makeup of OKRs. They were outcome oriented. Again, the team jumped back in with enthusiasm. They have some outcome oriented OKRs. First of all, they want to completely reinvent the learning pathway, and they would recognize success by increasing pass rate and reducing students quitting without starting a lesson. Yeah, these on the face of it are good outcome-oriented OKRs. And the team built stuff with these goals in mind. They measured whether they were moving the needle. They undertook customer research, made a difference. But the next quarter was a little tougher. They put their heads together and eventually came up with some new key results. They decided to look at customer acquisition. They'd need more students to hit financial targets. Again, they worked on sound ideas. Using research, they focused on key areas of their funnel. But the focus started to fracture as people struggled to connect the dots between the near future and the longer term. And when the next quarter started, OKR setting was hard. It seemed like every quarter was like starting afresh. And this is something I see repeatedly with teams. They don't know if they were really making progress. And again, they found themselves building without purpose. They asked, does anyone know whether to help in the long run? And here's, as is typical for John Cutler, here's an observation from, amazingly enough, 5 years ago. And this is so upside even now. So often organizations, they set goals, but they don't really connect back. Don't really connect back to what to their strategy in any way. So what we're doing now is it's trying to fit this into the bigger picture. What we're doing there is laying the groundwork for success in future quarters and years. What about the goals these times, to be honest, are people held accountable for those things work out okay? Or do they wipe the slate clean every year and start over? How do we hold ourselves accountable to measuring whether the strategy is actually working? They looked again at their strategy with a much more critical eye. They realized it was actually built on hypotheses, ideas that may or may not be true. They decided to rewrite a document with this perspective in mind. They realized that a good strategy evolves, it adapts to new learning. So they started again and quickly realized where they were making big assumptions about success. These were often in the areas that Richard Rummock calls the crux, areas that would make or break their endeavors. They embodied hypotheses that frankly may or not be true. So they made that explicit. The new strategy, still written like a narrative, was mindful where there were potential pivot points. So here's an example. We believe that the best way to increase pass rates is to improve the variety of high quality lessons available. Give more choice to students, they'll stick with us and find the lessons to help them pass. We also have a hunch that choice might not be the best way to address this crux. We will try to learn quickly and test this hypothesis. If it fails, we also believe we may achieve improved pass rates by creating more engaging and shorter lessons. So they already recognize that many ideas fail, and they're planning and looking at their strategy with that in mind. So they have no idea what lesson will work, what approach will work. So they're going to iterate through these hypotheses, taking one-way door decisions where possible, and this is really crucial. As any good strategy does, they also talked about the capabilities. What had let them down in the past? They identified two areas that would provide the highest value payback. First of all, they wanted to capture richer interaction analytics. In the past, when they've had ideas for improving learning pathways, they didn't have the data they needed to inform decision-making. They had to improve this. Better analytics were crucial to the type of hypotheses they would be testing. In addition, the team needed to improve their metric market research. They were good at identifying users and running good discovery sessions, but they lacked broader macro insights. They'd also need to improve that capability. And this is something I think is certainly bread and butter to a good strategy. What systems do we need to improve? Now, with these changes in mind, strategy felt more real. They thought it was mindful of the real world, and the simple fact that all their ideas will work just seemed more realistic. The team took another crucial step with their strategy. They rewrote it to talk about the order in which things would happen. They thought they had a flywheel, so they prioritized the right parts to get that moving. The strategy now explained what Rummock called coherent actions. It mixed a little of narrative of what they'd achieved and how they might do it over time. So think of the climber on the wall here. She takes the journey in parts, looking to avoid future roadblocks, but only really planning a few moves in more detail. She knows she'll have to adapt, but she still has an idea of the whole climb in her mind. And the key difference in business is that you don't have to climb in the order the wall presents itself. You should identify the hardest part, what Richard Rummock calls the crux, and start addressing that first. A good strategy keeps presenting you with the challenge most likely to derail you. They made one other crucial decision. When any of the viewpoints in a strategy were proven to be wrong, they'd always reflect and adapt the strategy itself. This is a crucial difference from the last iteration. They would make the strategy a living document. So the next step they wanted was to connect their strategy to their day-to-day work. And this is where they reconsidered OKRs. This is where OKRs to make that connection. Their new perspective on their strategy emphasized learning. So they took that in mind, kept that in mind when they built the OKRs. The approach they set to them pushed them to use OKRs as the basis of learning. Part of their value proposition, remember, is to give students an improved chance of passing exams. They need to find a sustainable way to prove they can achieve this. What they can't do is straight to achieving this for all subjects, so they narrowed it down. Let's create a focus group to work on, increase pass rates for 17-year-old history students, but also have a balancing metric. We can't do that just by throwing money at the problem. We have to do it in a sustainable way. Notice, as of all good OKRs, doesn't tell them how to achieve the goal, but it's specific. It gives them latitude to try some ideas cheaply. That's what I mean by the one-way door decisions. Now, the team tried various ideas to increase this pass rate. They run multiple bets. They landed on a mix of tailored lesson plans and lesson length as a key to improving success rates. So the lesson length idea was new. This invalidated the hypotheses that significantly increasing the number of instructors creating lessons was necessary. And this is really important, how an emergent strategy saved them a huge amount of money and failure. When the next quarter came along, they were in a strong position to set new OKRs. They reviewed their adaptive strategy and they understood the next biggest challenges to mount. And frankly, OKRs, relatively speaking, a breeze for once. So this embodies one of my favorite spiky points of view. I touched on it earlier, the concept of strategy and execution being separate. And Roger Martin says that this is a bankrupt concept. And his article from December of last year says as much, well worth a read. The core of Roger's argument is that strategy and what we call execution involve the same activities. At the heart, we're making choices. And he talks about those choices being made under uncertainty, competition, and constraints, like we have to when we're making product decisions. And he believes that, and I agree fervently, that this is bad for business, this differentiation, because it puts on one set of actions, strategy, above what we call execution actions. It's entirely consistent with the view we discussed, with the journey we've just discussed. And it also tells us that being good at making choices is really crucial at all levels. So I'm quite interested to hear where you are in your strategy journey. And let me just make sure I've moved on to the second poll. Where are you? Do you not have a strategy? Is it something you update annually? Is it something that you're updating quarterly, or is strategy truly a living document which you're bringing into conversations frequently? And I'll give you a couple of moments to answer that. There's some good honest answers here. So at the moment, we don't have a strategy is the leader. As I say in the chat, yep. Interesting. So there's around 16% saying that strategy is a living document for them. So congratulations to those teams, and well done. Just 1 second, and we will move on. So where do you start on this journey? How do you make progress in it? How do you go about liberating your strategy using OKRs? So the first step is to stop regarding strategy as something mythologically different. It's not more difficult than what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Yes, you need different data. You're looking at a longer time scale, but it isn't something other to what you do on a day-to-day basis. You're all capable of doing strategy. When you build a strategy, you're using the same muscles as you do for what you currently call execution. So the principles are the same. Second advice is the idea that strategy is organic and it must change as you learn. At my most recent FTE role, strategy was treated in exactly the wrong way. There was a strategy team who frankly were aloof, and there were teams that built products. They hardly talked to each other all year long, and the strategy didn't change either. And it encouraged the teams to think short term because they never felt they owned the strategy. I see you don't need to tell me to tell you how damaging this is. So here's my steps to get going from your perspective. Number one, create your own strategy. Look at your vision first. Does it still make sense? Is that vision specific enough? Articulate your best guesses towards achieving your vision. As Rosemary said, your hypotheses, what are they? Appreciate that some of those will not be true. They will be flawed. And I think, as someone mentioned on the last conversation, try to disprove your hypotheses. Pay very special attention to the toughest elements of the challenge, what Richard Rumwood calls the crux. When you found this, think about more than one way to solve the crux. Play what if. Now we start to bring our thinking into the nearer term. Look at the crux, think about the result you would need for your hypothesis to be true. Back to Roger Martin again, he uses the term, what would have to be true? Think about the ideas you'll try, the possible pitfalls and alternative routes. And then start to focus on the nearer term. Final step, build your periodic OKRs around the most difficult challenges. Think about what is the most difficult challenge to solve every time and write your OKRs about that every quarter. It's a fantastic change in mindset and discipline, and has made significant difference to every leadership team and every team I've worked with. Just thinking, what's the hardest thing to solve? And that's where your OKRs sit. I'm going to leave you with another example from an HMO. And in this example, it's devised a cost-based strategy that depends on it reducing hospital admission rates compared to their historical values. It's a big strategic bet, and they may have multiple ideas to achieve it. So they've observed that expensive hospital interventions often occur when customers fail to keep to their medicine plan. Data suggests that some medication adherence is related to customers running out of prescription. So they have some hypotheses, some ideas, some bets to actually resolve that. And they built these OKRs to test these ideas. As I said, it's a very expensive strategic bet. And they want to see, can they in a target group increase medication adherence? Can they actually solve that problem? Is there a way? Not for their whole community, which would be millions of people. Can they get people to take mail order prescriptions rather than picking them up from the pharmacy, from the drugstore? And finally, can they use some of their own technology to help people remember to reorder prescriptions? So just to summarize the last 24 minutes, strategy must face up to the toughest challenges. It must adapt as we learn. And OKRs should reflect those toughest challenges. Focus them on what would have to be true. It's an evolving view of how you succeed. And that evolution can be triggered by your OKRs.
Maybe for the last couple minutes here, any question, if anybody has one, they can pop it quickly in the chat. It might take one or two since we've got some time, but I'm going to ask one quick question actually, and that's more just about like OKRs in general, with regards to them as a strategy lens. How do you like to tackle them in the context of teams cascading OKRs? Both from the sort of company OKRs to the product team to maybe the function area or the product that you manage and work on.
Yeah, so I'll probably answer that in reverse order, Scott. The first thing I would say is functional OKRs are a pretty bad idea because generally we solve business problems as a cross-functional team, and that's the way to set your goals. In terms of cascading is, again, it's not a great idea. In fact, it's probably one of the worst ideas, really promoted by Measure What Matters. The reality is that actually what you should have at every level is some form of strategy. And I think because there is this mythology around strategy, teams don't build that. They think it's going to take weeks and months to build this. I just need to get on and execute. Whereas actually it's much, much easier to write a straw man strategy, circulate it, get feedback than you think. And so, yeah, get your strategy in at every level, because that's the way you've got a kind of forward plan. It's not just looking at the next sort of 4 weeks.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have any advice in the form of making OKRs more present in everyone's kind of day-to-day work and work life? It's a question here from Josine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just about building a habit. And so I'll give you an example of an insurtech I was working with where I started attending their leadership meetings weekly, and we talked about OKRs on a weekly basis, the company's top 3 goals. And what we were asking in that session was, okay, are we on track? Do we feel confident? We'd update the metrics as well, of course. And then we'd think about what's next. What's the next thing we do to actually help us succeed as in terms of hitting our goal? So it's habit building, make it weekly. And always ask the question, how does what we're doing help us achieve our OKRs? Yeah,
that makes sense. Thank you, Ian. I think that was really, really great. Great to hear some insights into the challenges of different sized organizations. Great to hear how you've approached OKRs and brought them forward. And hopefully everybody found this a really good connection to Rosemary's talk today on strategy, and definitely super, super helpful.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And yeah, thanks, Rosemary. Great talk just before mine.